What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. We're going to get right deep into this practice session nonsense. Essentially, you can hear at the beginning where I'm using all of these elements, if you will, of the practice session and sort of like individual parts. You hear the arpeggio sequence there. That's for technical requirements, if you will. And for music theory, I'm using sort of an entire practice session at the very beginning, just using the major scale, essentially, in its position with Locrian 3 notes per string. And of course, at the end, you hear me use strictly the pentatonic, of course, but using sort of like groupings and whatnot. And then, of course, I break into the last little bit, which is just an improvisation where I'm trying to create melody. I'm not trying to play fast anymore. I'm just trying to find cool notes that I can sort of milk and whatnot and just create a vibe that all the greats are able to do. And that's an incredibly important part of playing and sort of practicing, because if you don't practice it, you don't quite develop that skill. So you got to actually use the scale systems and be able to see them to arrange those notes into like a cool melody in the spur of the moment, not just sit there and think about it. You might do that more when you're getting into a song. You might want to harmonize it or something like that. But this skill to just improvise without shred, to create melody, very important in terms of the actual practice session stuff. So let's get into this first part. All right, at the very opening of the track, essentially, and what you're going to hear in the example after this little short of brief explanation is me basically messing around with the major scale. And that was the practice idea. I'm like, okay, I want to keep everything localized here to the first degree. So the first thing is I had to figure out what the first degree was. And I already knew from last week that this song was in G sharp minor. So I'm like, okay, nice. B major, right? Of course, you can use this minor third jump there too, is very useful, of course, on the low E string. The second note of the minor pentatonic scale. That also tells you the major there, right? Which puts you in Dorian, right? Oh, Phrygian. Dorian. Major, minor, Mixolydian, and back into the major again there, right? So that stuff there, breaking down the fretboard, obviously is incredibly important. If you can't do that, maybe not what I was doing there, but if you can't move around that scale, not much I can tell you, you know? You got to sort of start off with this. You know, you got to kind of take it to your level, but also concentrate on being like, this shape connects to this one, and then sort of anchor that somewhere. A lot of people learn the shapes, but they're like, where does that actually happen in the major scale? And in this case, it happens at the 6th degree, right? The G sharp before I jump at A sharp into B, right? A sharp in this case, of course, being the Locrian. And then, of course, the major scale. And from this position now, I can basically start to build my practice exercise, because it's now going to link up with the backing track, which is obviously another thing. Listen, stop looking at the, oh, this is in C minor or whatever it is. Okay, just look for a backing track, groovy, funky backing track or whatever it is, and put it on, and you don't know anything about it, and then try to find a note and then build the scale from that. That skill right there, which nobody can teach you except for yourself, is one of the most important things. Just be able to go like, okay, and know instantly from that note there, essentially, that you're playing in B major or G major or F major or whatever it is. And right now you're like, no. But trust me, once you do it a few times over the years, of course, it actually becomes second nature. And of course, that's a hallmark of all the killer guitar players. They have that skill. You need it. Get on it. And of course, just put the music on and be like, even if you do know it, just try to be like, wing it. to a note that in your mind, you're like, yeah, I think that's the right note. And then just keep refining that skill until you can actually do it. It's like anything else. It's nothing technical there besides training your ear to be like the difference between this sound and then, okay, like those two intervals, they have two different vibes, right? And of course, put them together and all of a sudden you're like, oh, look, there's like the harmonic minor or whatever it is. So obviously, the training of the hearing and whatnot, which you can't really get a guitar lesson on, is severely underrated. And realistically speaking, instead of sitting there and just naming the intervals, which you should also do, right, with respect to thirds and fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, and so on and so forth, nice. You should also basically just be able to feel that interval. You know, when you're like, okay, this is the root note, and you move into this one. In your mind, I mean, it's hard to explain, I guess, but you got to sort of use the force. I'm sorry. It's true. Okay, too many people have this wall of doubt in front of them. And in order to batter that down so that you can just be like, hit a note, and then build the scale immediately from just that one note, you have to first get over your fear of being like, well, what if I hit the wrong note? Sometimes the wrong note is the absolute right note. Okay, so despite all this practice stuff, don't lose sight of that. Just take it up at the speed that you're comfortable with what you know, and get more proficient on the fretboard. If you have to take it down a notch, so be it. Right, so starting out of the gate, I basically come out with this, of course, this major triad here, right? Filling in the three notes from this Locrian 3 notes per string position. But in the process, right, I'm just moving to that one, right? Of course, then to move back into the major to pentatonic in this case, and do it in a group of 4. Again, leaving me access there to that Locrian note, the 7th degree of this B major scale, right? See, I don't even care what the note is. I know this half step down is the Locrian position. I move down one more whole step. It's going to be Mixolydian, then Lydian, of course, then one more, oh, Phrygian. Once you get thinking like that, all you need to remember is just where you started and everything else falls into place. And then all of a sudden you can start messing around with it a lot easier because it's just one pattern. And then all of a sudden you make variations to it. We'll look at that in the arpeggios, but that's a big one right there. Right, so once I come down in these groups of 4, essentially I ascend now using this Locrian position. I know I can play a dominant 7 variant here, essentially. That sequence of notes, when you do a dominant 7 arpeggio, in one of its inversions, happens to overlay over top of the Locrian position right here at the 7th degree. Okay, so that's why I know I can go. I'm not doing any music math there. I just know that that shape exists there. And obviously dominant 7 and major, those two things go together, right? So when you play them, they sound awesome when they play off each other. Another hallmark of great players. They know how to create enough tension to draw the listener in and then just drop the bombs, right? And they're like, yes, sonic orgasm, done. It's a science to a certain degree, but it's also about feel. So you got to sort of accept it, of course. After I'm done the arpeggio, I'm jumping back up to the Locrian position and just coming down 3 notes per string. From here, using the pentatonic scale again, string skipping. Again, recycling the Locrian position there. To move up to the next one. That's the major scale, and I'm like, might as well do a melody kind of situation, right? That's a little more classically influenced, right? But there you go. You got the sort of idea of just ending with thirds, but just in this position. I know where I am. I could have went. And so on and so forth, and then just kept going. Okay, so that's really the long and short of the whole major part there. And I know I kind of really blistered through that, but listen to it slowly again, and then, of course, go back and listen to the original one, and then try to work up your own sequence. Don't worry about mine. Come up with your own, with what you're good at. Substitute in arpeggio shapes that you do know. If they're minor, if they're major, diminish, get on them. And of course, just take it slow. Too many people put too much pressure on themselves. Learn the shapes slowly so you can just play free form like I'm about to do, and then work up to playing it with the music. Next. All right, for the arpeggio section here, it's no big deal. Essentially, I move down to the 6th degree, right, of the B major scale like that. And I'm playing now this minor 7 flat 5 inversion. Once I get there, I decide to sort of sneak it around there. And from this position, it would allow me to do this A major 7, which in my mind, when I was doing it, I was just like, that'll sound cool. And so these arpeggio sequences have to be about, again, spontaneity, not just practicing things dogmatically, instead being dynamic and being like, start off with something that you know already. This is forcing me to move to something else, right? That's an unexpected sound comparably to what you would normally play kind of situation. Right? So not only is this arpeggio acting as a pivot point for me to move from one key to the next, because now I'm jumped into A major, right? And now I'm going to base the rest of my arpeggio sequence off that, where I slide up here to the Dorian position. Instead of doing this minor triad, I'm going to do a minor 7 variant, which normally happens at alien there, right? And then, of course, I can now do the half step down trick, dominant 7 from the Locrian position, right? So, I mean, I kind of get it. There's a lot to take in there, but the thing is like, to get to being able to do stuff like that is this other step where you have to take the confidence to be like, can I play these arpeggios like I play them? Can I mix and match them, so to speak, when I'm actually playing along with music? So I get different sequences. Can I superimpose other shapes that look kind of the same? Or I could have moved up here to this A and use that minor 7 flat 5 there based on the Lydian position, right? Or, you know, other ones too, of course. That would also be dominant 7 territory, right? So that's what I mean. Do you know them? Like, oh, look, those ones basically all look very similar. What happens if I start just substituting one over top of the other? Now, you're supposed to come up with that part on your own, but I'll tell you. So, you know, start doing that. Be like, oh, look, there are 3 that look kind of basically the same. So what happens if I start putting some of these other ones over top of where I'm supposed to play this one? And all of a sudden the light bulb will go off and you'll be like, damn, okay, wow, next level. So that's really all I have to say about that. You can hear me do it in the slow-mo version here. listen, it's about keeping it musical, right? Don't just sort of feel like you have to become like this machine, this robotic machine to do like these crazy shred arpeggios. Instead, try to use it as a template of notes that you can use, right? Where you're You see, the reason I can do that is because I know these positions in one spot so well that once you start superimposing them into a new position, it's just second nature. It's not that I'm necessarily a musical genius or anything silly like that. It's just good pattern recognition in a lot of ways. And of course, listening to lots of great guitar players to be able to know how to use phrasing and whatnot. So it sounds cool and musical. And that's the most important thing, right? So listen to the slow-mo version. I just did a fancier version there, of course. And then just try to get the same esprit going on. And at first, it's going to be a bit of an uphill climb, but, you know, Sisyphus, there is no end. There's always another mountain to climb, trust me, when it comes to music. So let's talk a little bit about the last part. All right, in the last part here, essentially all I'm doing is basically just playing around with, again, this whole step pattern with respect to the minor pentatonic. So I'm starting here, which is technically Mixolydian, right? And once I get there, my Dorian position, right? Into Phrygian, Mixolydian there, right? And of course, that's just me putting the Mixolydian and the Aeolian positions together, right? So I'm doing it like that. And of course, I'm just using the Zach Wild trick there, right? Okay, so it's just up to you to practice it. Now listen, analyzing your technique obviously is going to be a big part of your own learning process. Don't expect somebody to stand over your shoulder and be like, oh, okay, down, down, up, up, and whatever. No. Figure out for yourself, what is the most efficient way for me to do this? And just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be done. Sometimes you have to actually invest a lot of practice into something before you actually get it pretty good. And most of the time, it never stays really good unless you're practicing it all the time, and that gets boring. So take it with a grain of salt, right? So that's basically the first part there. Jumping up now to into that Aeolian position again, right? So again, essentially all I'm doing here is just using a sequence of fives, right? Like, and of course, I'm just sort of mixing and matching it with this. Now, I know you're like, oh, I can't do that either. It's this sort of idea that you're like, starts there, right? See, that is down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. You have to really sit there and analyze your playing until you can get it essentially very sequenced, zoomed down into the micrometer sort of level. When you're doing that, it doesn't have to be fast. You're like, what if I start with an upstroke? Oh, well, now all of a sudden I can do more sort of the economy stuff, right? And then it's a question of always being like, I have to start with an upstroke when I want to do that. Because the sequence will stay the same as far as the technique, and all you have to do is move it around. Right? So that's an important one. So knowing how to string them together, obviously. Oh, almost right. So that's really important. And of course, then the sequencing part, right? And you'll have to put them all together, obviously, start doing the sequences themselves, like with 3 strings for the hammer-ons and pull-offs, right? And getting those bends in there, that's going to be very helpful for you to be able to do these more intricate pentatonic runs, right? And that's a lot easier because you're basically using all, you're using all sort of like upstrokes and stuff, right? You just have to gauge the force necessary to get across the strings. So, you know, how do you train someone to do that? Through the internet. You can't. Last but not least, of course, is the melody part, right? So it doesn't matter. I'm just going to do it in E minor just because I'm lazy and I don't want to do it because I can barely see up here. So, you know, I'm starting off with the idea that I'm just going to outline essentially the scales, right? That's the most important thing to keep in mind there is just moving around, right? That's Ionian there, Dorian, oh, that's Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, pentatonic there, minor, of course, minor pentatonic, Mixolydian position. Oh, that one? Oh, Dorian. You see what I mean? You have to know where you are. And that's got to be job number 1. You'll never get it fast. And so to be able to keep track of it. And of course, then instead of doing big scale runs like I was doing there, break them up. And so you're like, okay, starting with this one. Like there's a note down here. And you can then, you know, start to bend and use those more sauce notes. And just string together a melody. Classic Petrucci, right? Supplemented there with the speedier parts, right? But there's always that sense of trying to keep the melody going. And creating longer passages like that. Now listen, it takes a while to sort of be able to mess around. Of course, you're going to be adding in sort of the chords and stuff like that, right? So you're like... So you start to get those intervals into your ears too, right? And then of course you can switch the... Start getting into basically triad pairs there where you use 2 different triads to get 2 really interesting flavors. And of course you can start stacking them and all kinds of good stuff like that. But initially, obviously you just have to start with the melody. Just 1 series of notes. That's a melody. If you can't do something that's simple, that's where you got to start. Is just start to get that feel. Notice how it's not static. It's moving back and forth, but you have to sort of think like a musician now. Be like it's a language. And you're like, okay. The answer, right? And there it is, right? So I'll leave it up to you. And there is no real slow section for the slow part, because at this point, you're basically trying to take these scale exercise where you're combining all the different elements together, you know, with different techniques and using different scale systems and applying different chords. Of course, you can try those out, right? There's B not major 9, I would just say, you know, it sounds awesome. You can also do this one. We're getting the 6 and the 3rd in there. It's like kind of like a major 6. That's going to be another good one there. So, you know, those are going to sound really great over a backing track like that. And you should be looking for those chords based around this first degree, right? So again, you saw all the music theory put into play, and then basically some of the scale stuff as well. And so it's up to you to sort of take the more static shapes, you know, when you're just sort of, okay, I've got this one. That's your new confines between Ionian and Dorian. And you're like, okay, I can... You see what I mean? And you start to make these connections musically because you can actually understand how the music works with tension and release. So that only gets developed when you work on these melodies, because just one note, you've heard it. That note can change everything in a piece of music. And of course, resolving up from it. And that is essentially the lowest common denominator of the kind of concept I'm talking about. This ability to then take that and expand it over 7 or 10 notes or whatever it is, and effectively make these really cool sequences where you're doing arpeggios or you're superimposing scales. And so it starts off as like a practice idea, and then you're essentially then marrying it up with the music. And at the very end, you're starting to just get rid of these little constructs altogether and just freely move around the fretboard, trying to connect the shapes together using different patterns, different sequence, little arpeggio fragments, whatever it is. And it keeps, you know, every time you make changes, you're actually kind of thinking in advance what it is that you want to do or the sound you want to create. And you kind of get the idea there that it keeps it fresh and interesting. So I wish you the best of luck in your practice situation. We're going to do another one of these ones on Sunday. So stay, you know, we're going to do more of that intermediate level stuff. Should we go for advanced on next Tuesday? Maybe. We'll see. Catch you in the next one.